All right, this is the limitations to work portion of energy system training on the air rower. As mentioned in the introduction, it's important to look at what limits people doing work in order for us to develop a good base of support as to how we go about doing that work. So this is a theoretical portion, so it gives you, again, a base supportive education before we get into the implementation of energy system training, okay? Two areas we'll discuss here. What IMP equals D means, as well as this whole teamwork approach to doing exercise. First, IMP equals D. Intention, modality, and person dictates the dose response. So when we look at any piece of work, and for this conversation we're talking about the air rower and energy system training, we want to say, what is the intention of the individual? What's the modality that we're working with, i.e. the rower, and how is that different than other modalities? And what is the person? Who are we talking about here? Those three things largely dictate what will happen in the work that's being performed on the rower, okay? It's just very easy to get lost into time frames meaning something, right? So when we say 30 seconds of really hard effort, what does that really mean? It's almost similar to saying 5 repetitions of weight training, right? 5 repetitions means nothing. All it means, it's 5 repetitions. But we have to color those repetitions in order to say, what are we actually trying to get out of those reps? The same thing for the air rower, the same thing for all different dose responses that you want to get in work. The intention of the person, the modality of which you're using, and the person themselves largely dictate what's going to happen in that work environment. How does this work back to limitations? Well, you'll understand when you see people doing specific acts of work, gain, really hard stuff, pain, which is less powerful but more mentally painful activity, right, which leaves you flat on the back, and then sustain activity, right? When you see people doing this, you'll be able to say that they get there because of these 3 areas, okay? So it's a good baseline support and understand that. I'll briefly discuss each one. Intention. Why are you doing the exercise? That has to be the first thing that we discuss as we get into it. If you've heard me in mechanics, you've heard me talk about it in the history here and our overall intentions, our goal for the air rower is to be sustainable as possible with great efficiency. That's the overarching goal, right? You notice I didn't say to look good on a social media platform, to broadcast how powerful you are, to become super strong in the row movement. Those could be good things, but it's not the intention, right? So the intention of what we're going to do for the air rower and how we're going to express gain, pain, and sustain is to make it sustainable contractions that look really good for a long period of time, okay? Because that leads to a host of really positive things, which I don't need to get to, but that's the overarching intention. So you can see how this could be different. Imagine if the intention was to suffer, right? Like that's someone's intention, was to go after a dopamine response, a glycolytic environment, and to just get into painful scenarios so they get something from that. You know, then their intentions going into this are completely different, right? So that even changes up the argument on, well, should they be efficient? Well, it's not really that important to be efficient. Why? Because what's the overall intention? Is suffering, right? So you don't need to be really efficient to suffer, right? Ironically, if you are not efficient, you'll actually suffer less. Anyways, this is a wormhole you can get into. These intentions are not on suffering, right? It's based upon being as sustainable as possible, and I'm repeating, be sustainable as possible with good efficiency over a long period of time, okay? Modality. Modality means, for your understanding of exercise physiology, is the different machines that you're going to use, okay? So recognize the difference in feel of sprinting across land for 30 seconds versus upright bike for 30 seconds versus swimming for 30 seconds versus jump rope for 30 seconds versus ski erg for 30 seconds versus, did I say swimming? Yeah, I'll say it again. Versus swimming for 30 seconds versus assault bike for 30 seconds, right? Just think about those. All of those and the different modalities offer a different dose response. They all feel differently, okay? So you can't classify 30 seconds of work and say it means anything without the modality being considered, okay? So know that what we're talking about here for the air rower, now that you understand the aspect of the mechanics, you know the contractions, right? You know it's just a concentric contraction done over and over really efficiently, and then how your capacity has to balance out based upon that. We know it wants to be a really good skill, and we are doing the rower, which looks like that, a seated deadlift, squat, low row, repetitively, okay? And it's not like upright biking. It's not like ski erg. It's not like swimming. So you just have to recognize that the change in modality gives someone a different response of the exercise that they're doing, okay? So now we have two things to take into variable for that dose response. One, why am I doing it, and what's my real deepest intentions? Secondly, what modality am I using? Third, it's the person. Now the person colors this tremendously. To be small on that color, how often the person has been on the rower determines this. Has the person only been on water and now they're coming on land? Has the person have zero experience with a rower? Does the person have no experience whatsoever in the patterns of deadlift, squat, seated low row? Does the person been doing this for 15 years, right? Think about that. Well, it'll make 10 years because the math is better. Twice a week, 50 weeks a year, so that's 100 sessions a year. For 10 years, that's 1,000 sessions on the rower. I just give you an idea to think about that. Like I used that for the assault bike, right, as an example. That's a lot of repetitions. Assume those were all good, right? So what kind of response is that person getting out of a maximal effort for 30 seconds? A tremendous amount of power. Why? Experience, great mechanics, great technique, experience with real hard efforts, experience with the patterns and the contraction type and the skill. You get my point. Okay, so the person largely colors this tremendously. Now, but the main important point I wanted you to get from that is that experience and training age, i.e. what we call capability, largely dictates the dose response. So with someone with zero training age, right, as you'll recognize as we go through sustain, gain, and pain, or I should say gain, pain, and sustain, you'll see that some of those individuals don't actually have the capability of expressing those, right? So you can see that you could say, well, 20 to 30 seconds really hard on the rower, that must be OPEX gain. Well, on paper it is, but if we don't know the person that's doing it, we can't say that it is OPEX gain. So that person has zero training experience, is technically inefficient at the movement, we'll just presume that, and we're like, well, just go for it, because the book says 20 to 30 seconds is OPEX gain. They don't even get that. Their mechanics are all over the place, they quite possibly could hurt themselves, and now what you're left with is a rehab program and not an actual expression of OPEX gain. You get my point. So these three areas, we need to be better critical thinkers and higher order thinkers as coaches and people who are participating in energy system training to think about this. And it doesn't stick you into an area that you're only capable of one particular aspect of energy system training, but it'll make you appreciate all the work that needs to go into you expressing all of them, okay? So for limitations of work, to understand where people have limits, go no further than recognizing intention, the modality in which you're choosing, and the person largely colors the limitations that are imposed on that working environment, okay? Secondly, as a construct of what I like to call team play, all work that people do, especially when we're going to talk about it for the air rower, if I was to walk across land and walk across faster, etc., every time I do work, I want you to think of you having a team of material items inside that are all working together to coordinate activity, okay? So this teamwork approach of the blood, lungs, and the muscle just creates this, it just ties people into having this unity in how we want to build these skills of this teamwork, getting together over time to have the best expression possible, okay? So they all work together, but they all work at different rates relative to the intensity. So if you have, for example, and this is just how I'm classifying so you know it, if you do really painful stuff, the main area that you're using is blood, okay? That's for painful activity. For sustained activity, the main area that you're using is the lungs. And for, this is pain, this is gain, and this is sustain. So I'll say it again. Pain, blood, lungs, sustain, muscles, gain. So just think about that. Muscles, gain. Hard stuff, right? That's the main thing that you're going to be using on it. Lungs. All right, sustainable activity. Blood, pain, yucky, 2 minutes, right? So that doesn't mean that now when you're doing pain, these aren't working, right? It doesn't mean that when I'm doing only gain, these aren't working, right? It's just that the rate as which you're using it, okay? And the only reason why I reduce it down to this team play is to allow, again, a unification of these so that you can express all of them effectively over time, and you recognize there are some differences. There is some demarcation in relation to what's being used most often when you go about that. Now, how does this important to limitations? Well, it's the scaffolding of all these things that you need to prepare and put together in order. So that means that when you start doing activity, we start with slow activity, and then you build with great repetitions over time. And if you add strength component to that, you'll be able to express all of these effectively should you wish to do so. Okay? But if you choose not to do that, all you do out of the gates is do blood training, which most people choose to do, right? And I'll put this down, sorry for the sound, on the board so you can understand that. That would be P, that would be S, and I'm going to get to this to understand it, but just so I can classify each area. Most people love this puppy, right? So just imagine they're like, oh, cardio machine. Oh, high intensity activity leads to burning fat. Oh, I need to do really hard stuff. So they understand and they feel this pain all the time. So just think about that in context of what I talked about for intentions. What is the intentions? To create sustainability of great contractions so you can do it forever, right? So what's going to happen, do you think, if all they focus on is this team player? These guys become inefficient, and they now create a compensatory model to do this all the time, okay? So what's the ironic fix for a lot of those people? Great gain training, which is mean proper strength training, and really good aerobic work. Do you see how that complements the entire thing? It doesn't mean that we pigeonhole this puppy and say you shouldn't do it all the time. No, if you can express it, okay, we're fine with that. But what I'm saying is that you need to think about all of this in a team play orientation, and that'll set the intentions correctly. And it also talks about some of the limitations that are imposed, because I'm going to recommend that people get really good at sustainable contractions over time, right? And then you can lead into doing some muscle and blood work as you progress based upon that. So build repetition, build contractions, build a really good aerobic base support, and then you can start doing more strong and more powerful contractions should you wish to over time, okay? So that's a limitations of work conversation, very theoretical in mind, but I hope it creates a nice base support around the why you're doing it, understanding the machine you're using, and understanding that people color that, so that you can look at every piece of work people do from now on and go, interesting, right? Interesting. What are they really doing it for? What are they using and what's the differences? And then who is this person, right? And then you'll start to see that all of this expression of work largely has to do with these three areas. And then hopefully you can tie in the importance of team play and recognizing the priority of doing the lungs before either of these, and just recognizing that you want it to be a coordinated team effort so that we can move forward here and express energy system training as much as possible.